rid of the cloud. Now it's official. You've heard the voice. Thank you for that reminder, Tom. 2 years, still can't do it. I was riveted at a Zoom Commonweal panel discussion last spring when I heard Dr. Cecilia González-Andrieu tie together beauty and righteous anger and hope and resilience in the 15 minutes or so that she was granted as part of that Commonweal panel. And I knew that her work on those topics, especially as they pertain to undocumented students and other marginalized people on our Catholic campuses, would find a receptive and thoughtful home with Collegium alums. Dr. Cecilia González-Andrieu is a beloved professor of theology and theological aesthetics at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and she's a tenacious advocate for, in her own words, not allowing in any way for a world in which human dignity is trampled. She's a documentary filmmaker and a prolific, compelling author in both academic and popular presses. I could gush, and I really hope you will seek out her work that I've dropped into the chat, but I want to make sure we get a chance to learn from her for more than just those 15 minutes that still nourish me. And perhaps we can even enjoy a few minutes of discussion when she's done with her comments. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Cecilia González-Andrieu to your full Zoom screen. And Cecilia, welcome to Collegium.
Thank you so much. You're embarrassing me, Karen. Thank you, Karen and Tom and Collegium for this wonderful invitation. And for everybody who's going to be looking at this in the recordings, that's cool. I get it. The first thing I want to do is apologize beforehand if I have any technical glitches, since I'm going to be trying to go back and forth between being on screen and then maybe sharing some images. So bear with me on that one. So let me just invite you to take a deep breath and to settle into your seat as comfortably as you can, and to feel your whole self becoming present. So join me in the space, as limited as it is, and in this reflection that I am undertaking with you in solidarity. The last couple of years have been punishing. Our classrooms had to be suddenly emptied, and the posters announcing upcoming events became relics of a past that never was. Our students were reduced to flat little boxes on a screen and needed us more than ever as they were battling depression, fear, and uncertainty. We stopped important research projects, and presses and societies and institutes all shut down. Our campuses grew silent without choruses and bands. Our spaces became less brightly hued without studios and plays. And our places became devoid of a pulse without dancing and ball games. We lost the knowledge we used to have deep in our bones that let us know we were in a holy space, and the sweetness and the sacredness of community, of just simply being people together. Now, you're not alone in this exhaustion that more than once has made me and probably each of us wonder, should I stop doing this? What if I just quit? These have been punishing times. And now, what I would not have expected months back when I accepted this generous invitation has become a reality. A truly horrific war destroying everything in its path. These are punishing times. And I'm not here to tell you that there's some sort of silver lining to all this, or that if we just have enough faith, everything's going to be all right. No, I'm here to help us face these punishing times productively. There are no silver linings, and faith, although sustained by prayer, cannot stay there, but needs to move into action. So my dear friends and colleagues, I want to highlight something, and let's see if you agree. The three defining events of our time, a pandemic, a racial reckoning, and a war, have placed educators in an undeniable position of global significance, but only if we dare to claim it. I say dare because just as Pope Francisco describes the church as a field hospital for the wounded, I invite us to see educators as frontline workers. We are providing aid, to be sure, but more than that, we can be those crucial workers who can help create a world where the wounds never happen in the first place. Educators are involved in a project that can make true what Dostoevsky first saw and then St. John Paul II highlighted. The project that makes real their insight that beauty will save the world. So let me tell you three stories, and unbelievably, all of these are from this past week. The first story begins the day I asked my students to carry out a group discussion and answer the question, if there was one thing in the world you could change, what would it be? They went off into their groups, deliberated, and returned to report, and their answers really surprised me. We want everyone to have access to education. We want education to be prioritized. We want education to be universally available. Now, this is not a class on education. This is an undergraduate Christian theology course for non-majors. And we've spent the last 9 weeks exploring the person of Jesus, what he taught, how he taught, what he did, who he loved, and who loved him. And we've done this engaging with artistic creativity while looking at the wounded state of our world. That the students converged on education as the universal good that helps make possible the just distribution and protection of all other universal goods told me they were getting it. They were getting the gospel. They got Jesus. Feed the hungry and then make sure they're never hungry again. Change the systems. Heal the world. Second story. This starts with a text message so early in the morning, I was half asleep and still in bed. Hey, Dr. Cecilia, please forgive the random plea for help, but the Great Farm Worker kid from Madison got rejected from LMU. Anything we can do to help? Reconsider? This message was from one of my former students, now at the State Department. entangled in the middle of the developing war and traveling on diplomatic missions. He stopped to remember the child of farm workers he had come to know and to ask for help. What he called a plea was more a loud proclamation of the extraordinary value of education and a painful reminder of how insufficient access to education really is. A young State Department staffer, seeing firsthand the horror of a world gone mad, was pleading for us to widen the circle of those who will develop the tools to heal the world. The third is a news story, and maybe you also heard it. Dana Bietschana, who had made the perilous journey to cross the border from Ukraine into Poland, fleeing the bombings. The next day, she returned to the border to help. She was a high school teacher. And in addition to helping with translations, she was trying to get herself set up to teach her class remotely. The reporter is dumbfounded and he tells her, "I'm amazed that you're continuing to teach economics, having just evacuated from a war, to students who are in a city that is being bombed. It's unbelievable." Now, Ms. Bietschana responds with a conviction that I really want to remember. More than that, I really want to emulate. She says, "We all understand that we want to build our Ukraine, our native country, a future for our country. And all of us make what we can and what we do for our future and for our children's students." These stories put flesh on the question of just how it is that beauty saves the world. If you're like me, when you heard about the university students all wanting to use up their one wish on universal access to education, cognizant that this was something that they had, they valued, and they wanted to share, your heart warmed. And maybe when you imagine a young State Department staffer frantically texting his old teacher at dawn from who knows where in the world, in the middle of a war, to ask for help in securing a shot at college for a young boy living in a migrant farm worker community, well, your heart got a little fuller still. And then when you heard about an Ukrainian refugee trying to teach her classes to young students remotely as bombs fell, well, perhaps then your heart got so full that you could feel it in your throat. What our experiences of these three stories share is that we recognize them as beautiful. These are punishing times, yet here it is, the kind of beauty that resists every attempt to destroy it. The beauty of the priorities, relationships, and longed for outcomes that speaks eloquently to our hearts when we listen. Real beauty is intrinsically tied to the good and to the true. and in this way helps us to understand the ethical and spiritual power of something. Beauty helps us long for it, work for it, change the world for it. So let's tease this out. Is education the kind of beauty that will save the world? Let's start with the question of universality, or what our institutions might call diversity, equity, and inclusion. The access to education without boundaries that my young students wish for reveals the three transcendental attributes of beauty, goodness, and truth. First, access to education contributes to truth. Education puts obstacles in front of disinformation and manipulation. The pursuit of truthfulness goes hand in hand with the appreciation of complexity and the value of pluralism. The search for truth is a formidable enemy to would-be tyrants. Second, access to education is a good in itself. It contributes to building up a person, a community, and a society, and is a sure sign of the inherent dignity of those whose image should always remind us of our Maker. The great commandment of loving our neighbor requires the good of education be universally distributed to all and without distinction as a remedy for the sins of poverty and exploitation. Let's move to the question of resources and priorities that will give a child working on the grape harvest in California a shot at building a better life for his family. This only happens when a society decides to spend resources wisely and to prioritize what truly matters. What is the truth that this beauty reveals? If we put education at the top of our spending priorities, we will have addressed the root causes of much of our world's suffering. We will educate people to see the world as it is and to face down problems rather than cover them up. We will prepare them with the tools that should belong to us all to be subjects of our destinies. And what is the good in this? Well, if we prioritize education, we build societies without haves and have-nots. We care for the most vulnerable in a way that will make them less vulnerable each day. And there's a great bonus. If we prioritize education in our national budgets, maybe we will spend much less on weapons and policing because we will not need them. Third, let's ask the question of courage. Yes, that rare thing that affluent societies completely forget in our comfort. But that was certainly there as Jesus faced down the Romans, as Martin Luther King faced down racism, as Dorothy Day faced down poverty, as St. Oscar Romero faced down violence, as teachers teach in refugee camps and in prisons. What is the truth in the beauty of courage? To teach in the middle of a war zone because you absolutely believe that in teaching you're helping to save the world is a profound expression of the value of life. To teach as an act of defiance against everything that would destroy the creation God made and sustains is a profound act of a truthful, living faith. And where is the good in this? To teach as an act of courage is to reveal an ethical center that says that justice means something, that ideas become actions, that actions can give life or can deal in death. We, my friends, the educators, the ones who see ourselves reflected back in the pupils of young eyes, asking us questions, we are involved in the project of life. To teach is to believe, like Dana Bietschana, that there is a future already breaking in, already bubbling up, already becoming in each young person that we encounter. So will beauty save the world? And is education an instance of the kind of beauty that saves? If we can notice how profoundly beautiful prioritizing, accessing, and then teaching courageously can be, perhaps we can answer yes. Not because we're optimistic, but because we're realistic. Beauty is a very complicated experience, because if we're awake to it, it can bring la realidad, the real, into view by attracting us to its truthfulness and goodness. We feel the beauty of young students wanting everyone to drink from the well of education. We feel pulled to reimagining our priorities so no one is left out. We are inspired by seeing the very act of teaching as an act of courage. But beauty can also do its vital work, and sometimes do it even more eloquently, by pointing us to its absence. In other words, when we have experiences that are heartbreaking, this is because we are recognizing that beauty is missing, vanished, gone, destroyed. The wakeful human heart is called to respond to experiences that reveal the absence of beauty by restoring beauty to its rightful place. Perhaps we're seeing this now most clearly on a global scale as the horror of the war unfolds. And many in the world respond with unrestrained generosity. So formed to be awake by an environment that encourages their questions and their voices, my students have been honing their sense of beauty through getting to know Jesus Christ. Through him, they encounter the paradigmatic human who goes before us, as the gospel tells us, showing us the way to our humanity. Encouraged by his example and vision of the reign of God breaking into our world, they respond to the scandal of climate change and global apathy. They notice exploitation and oppression. They see beauty under attack everywhere, and they become beauty's committed champions. Beauty is gone. Beauty must be restored. Or think of my former student who answers the call of a migrant farm worker family and imagines their child bent over crops in the punishing sun, moving from place to place, locked in a state of non-being and non-personhood with no way out. My former student uses his power for others. He reaches out, he acts, because his heart is breaking. Beauty is gone. Beauty must be built up. And then the Ukrainian teacher, caught under a terrifying rain of explosions, knowing that her homeland is being bombed into oblivion. The most graphic absence of beauty any of us can imagine. She responds to beauty gone by creating it with her hands, lighting the lamp of sharing education and placing it on a hill to battle the darkness. Beauty is gone. Beauty must flow from each of us and fill the world. Now, writing at the dawn of the 21st century, St. John Paul II called education a supreme art form because it involves us in ensuring the growth of the person and the development of the community. The pontiff invites us to be alert to every epiphany of the inner beauty of things. Now, over 2 decades later, in his most recent book, Let Us Dream, Pope Francisco wants to guide us to what he understands as our most urgent work. I quote him, "To guarantee a world where dignity is valued and respected through concrete actions is not just a dream, but a path to a better future." Now, I want to suggest to you then that a Catholic institution devoted to education is key to this better future. We do this by developing a community committed to planetary flourishing through the practice of being awake to the challenges disclosed by beauty or its heartbreaking absence. So allow me to lay out some specific challenges for us to ponder. First, many of our universities have programs where we do service outside our classrooms. We want to expose our students to the difficult issues others face, those that too often are euphemistically called the less fortunate. And we also often invite our students to service trips to other parts of the world. To describe the poor on the peripheries as less fortunate means we think of those who have more financially secure lives and power as fortunate. And this makes it all seem quite innocent. We are fortunate, they are not. So we help them out of our kindness. Fortune, luck is to blame or thank for the state of things, not our economies built on the labor of the poor, not the inordinate wealth amassed, hoarded and flaunted by the few while the ranks of our unhoused, displaced and hungry neighbors swell. So let's untangle this. The great theologian Gustavo Gutierrez tells us that we do not help the poor because they are good. We help the poor because God is good. So let's break this open. First, this exhortation teaches us to stop using euphemisms. Let us deal with la realidad honestly. Poverty is awful, painful, undeserved, and this has nothing to do with fortune or luck. Let us allow the absence of beauty of the lives of the poor to hit us with its full and devastating force. Let us use language that is truthful so it becomes revelatory. Second, when we help to build a just world, we're not doing this because we have judged some people deserving because they are good, which easily allows us to judge others as undeserving because we see them as less than good. We are not judges. We do not get to choose who we help. This is not our role as fellow creatures. If we assent to a vision of the God of love and of life of the biblical witness, then we are obligated by what this God commands, not our own whims. This takes us to the third insight Gutierrez provides. Every act of aid to the poor, of peacemaking, of restoring the shunned to community, every one of these acts is willed into reality by the goodness of God. Ultimately, to repair the world, as in the beautiful phrase from Jewish mysticism, tikkun olam, is the strongest witness any of us can give to the reality of a loving God who accompanies God's world, always making present God's goodness. In helping the poor because God is good, we are asked to see the poor as anyone who is vulnerable. And as Pope Francisco asks us to do, extend this view of poverty and vulnerability to all of the created goodness of our planet. God's goodness requires action on behalf of the poor, and the poor include everything that is fragile in our world. Now, as we make this preferential option for the vulnerable, we connect back to two ancient concepts in Christianity. The first is that we are acting in a way that honors our imago Dei, faithfully embodying and honoring the image of God in each of us and in the other. Second, that we are making ourselves through intentional practice ever more capax Dei. This means we grow in our capacity to know God and to listen to God's gentle voice in our hearts, a voice that speaks eloquently through the attraction of beauty and through the heartbreak of beauty's absence. So as people who are imago Dei and working hard on capax Dei, living in punishing times, let's ask ourselves some really difficult questions. When we arrive at our campuses, do we notice that an entire underclass of people is keeping them going? During the pandemic, we came up with a euphemism for them, essential workers. But we should have been honest and called them what they are, the working poor. They were often the first to be laid off or forced to work in difficult conditions because they live paycheck to paycheck. Do we pay our groundskeepers, our custodians, our cafeteria workers a living wage? Do we check to see if these colleagues of ours have benefits? Do they have any access to the banquet of education we are preparing and serving? Or are we satisfied keeping them outside, unable to get even a morsel? Scripture tells us that it is much easier to look at the speck in our neighbor's eye rather than to see the gigantic beam in our own. So let's have the courage of educators to look at the beams. How do our campus structures contribute to inequality? How complicit are we in perpetuating a world with clearly marked boundaries between the professor and the cafeteria worker, or even between the tenured professor and the very underpaid part-time instructor? Is a world organized in a way that some must be poor so others may be comfortable? A world that reflects the biblical vision of a God of love and of life? In addition to looking at poverty and inequality in distant lands, do we dare to look at our own campuses? Will we notice that despite our beautiful lawns and buildings, if we are perpetuating poverty in our own internal systems, we are really far from beautiful? And then moving the circle beyond our campus, let's ask some more problematizing questions. How difficult is it to be part of our educational banquet served up at our institutions? Are we prioritizing financial aid and support for those whose lives will be most dramatically changed by education? The first generation student, the undocumented student, the child of farm workers. Are we recruiting students past the usual places? Are we going to the peripheries, as Pope Francisco exhorts, to bring those out there in here to become part of an ever expanding us? Is our campus a place filled with the beauty of many colors, languages, and religions? Are we attentive to the challenges faced by those who are the first, the only, or who hold down 2 jobs and commute because they desire the beautiful good of education we have promised them? If we find ourselves serving the privileged on campuses made only for their advancement, isn't this very far from beautiful or truthful or good? I want to conclude by moving the circle even further out to encompass our whole world. How are we involved in creating the kind of beauty that will save the world? As educators, how do we embody what on my campus we call the service of faith and the promotion of justice? Will the student leaving our classrooms be prepared to act as Imago Dei and be working on being Capax Dei, wherever it is that their life takes them? These are punishing times. And in this heartbreak, the times open us up to what has to change. Education is a frontline for beauty reimagined, rebuilt, and restored. And in this way, beauty can and will save the world. So let me add a thank you to my students who gave me permission to share their art. And a special thank you to the John August Swanson Trust, who gave me permission to show his amazingly beautiful, the Festival of Lights. Thank you for your attention.
I don't know how you manage to be both sobering and so uplifting at the same time, Cecilia, but that's a tremendous gift, and thank you so much. We have a little bit of time for questions or comments that people might like to put out for Cecilia or the good of the order. You can drop them in the chat if you don't like talking on a Zoom screen.
Likes talking on the Zoom screen. Do you want to stop the recording maybe?
That might be a good idea.
Yeah.
And then I'll have to remember to turn it on for the wrap up. So I will stop, I'll pause it. I'm going to wrap up knowing that there's so many questions and burning desire to do this work better in all of us. So Cecilia, I'll just stop by saying thank you for igniting the fire, and to use the language of Collegium, to embody both the prophetic and the sacramental imagination in one person has just been, it has been compelling and riveting. And I'm so, so grateful that you carved time out of your teeming schedule to share with us. And to those of you on my screen, so very grateful for your presence as well. Keep Collegium on the radar, because we've really enjoyed this year of offering some follow-up sessions, because we all remember the Collegium mountaintop, and sometimes we want more of that. And so always open to your suggestions for topics and speakers and workshops that we might be able to offer to across country through the miracle of Zoom. And that helps me hate Zoom just a little bit less, which is fantastic. All right, so I'll bid you good afternoon and good lunch, and thank you so much for being here, everybody. Take care. Cecilia, if you could hang on for just a couple minutes, that would be great. Okay, so it's just bravo, that was so beautiful. I mean, I was trying to keep it together emotionally as you were talking.